All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome so much to our day 3 daily briefing from COP28. Democrats abroad, Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida. We welcome you to today's program. So glad to see each and every one of you here. As always, will let you know, you feel free to throw your questions inside the chat. We're always monitoring those. We'll direct them to their appropriate fellow who will be able to address them from our folks who actually have those boots on the ground right now in COP28 in Dubai. Yesterday, there was quite a bit of news coming in as tension continues to work itself out between the hosts, Abu Jaber, who is representing Dubai and the UAE, and also the COP president Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez, who have had some really terrible beef between each other as they are trying to work out the phasing out of coal over a long period of time. But there's also some pretty cool headlines that are coming out today out of the conference, some things that I think give us a little bit of hope. However, I'd like to turn our attention right now to John. John, how are you feeling about day 3 so far?
Well, I've had a very interesting day. Some very fortuitous meetings just occurred, and I'm pleased that now Dana is joining us from Democrats Abroad. So we've got our team together now, and as we refine the technical issues, our various logistics of telecommunications and all the various equipment we need for the video and the lighting and the sound, we'll work those things out. But I have some interesting things to discuss about some of my meetings today and how they went, and some of the history behind them that sort of ties into the overall history of the climate issue, how it's evolved over the decades, and how people's focus and attention and missions in life have begun to evolve finally, when we should have started decades ago. But people are finally getting here, and I think there's a sense of that at this COP. And then also, I'd like to talk some more about some of the people I've met here on the street, in the metros, and how they feel about this city of Dubai and its atmosphere, and how welcoming it is to their presence and change. And this COP is all about achieving change in the local society.
John, why don't we start with what's your background? What building have you chosen this time as your backdrop? Yesterday it was the Water Pavilion. The day before, we saw our own University of Florida logo up there. So what is your background today?
Well, I'll let you get a better look at it as I step away for a moment. But this talks about, there's a banner here that says, "Climate is humanity's greatest challenge. Let's solve it together." And then above it, it has the same message in Arabic. Where we are between a couple of the buildings, the Global Climate Action Building and some agricultural buildings. There's just a whole series of buildings here. And I'm hoping to get into the agricultural pavilion that's just adjacent to us. And hopefully tomorrow they'll have that set up and fully functional. Agriculture is a big focus of this COP. And, that's my background as far as an agricultural engineer who deals with water and energy. So I'm looking forward to visiting this expanded food pavilion. There's always been a presence of many food organizations, FAO and many of the others, but this seems to have an expanded coverage and participation of food-focused organizations. And that's largely because so much of the climate change is happening now and is wreaking disaster on food production in many parts of the world, and people are now aware that they must adapt to it. So that will be focus my attention as it is of this COP gathering.
Absolutely, a very fitting background, I would say, for the work that we do. I'd next like to introduce the newest member of our daily briefing segment, Dana Freling. Dana is working right now with Democrats Abroad as the Environment and Climate Crisis Council, the founder of and the chair of that council. Right now, she works in Finland, if I remember right, and is a native Texas voter. And she actually has been working in environment and sustainability for most of her career, a lot of it being in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. Dana, welcome so much to the program. Glad to have you here.
Just delighted to be here with you, Rock, and John today to join the Environmental Caucus of Florida. You are Democrats as well. And as you mentioned, I represent not just Democrats, but all of us American Democrats living overseas. For those of you who don't know, we are about 6.5 million eligible voters living outside the United States. And of that, only 7.8% vote. We have a huge margin of for growth, but we have been the margin of victory in many very important elections up and down the ballot, including the 2020 presidential election, where we brought in the states of Arizona and Georgia. We are working hard to help make sure that the new Democratic administration under the Biden-Harris administration are pushing the envelope, and they have achieved so much, but there's so much work left to achieve. I am delighted to hear about the announcements today from Kamala Harris as she spoke today, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that later. But I'm so happy to be here with all of you today, and to all our folks watching all around the world, Americans who live this climate crisis every day and who have a lot invested. So welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction, Dana. And it's true. Vice President Kamala Harris is on the ground right now in COP28. And this comes with the announcement that the U.S. is attempting to close as many of the coal-fired power plants as possible within the next 20 years before 2050. Again, the highlight and the key year there, I think, being 2050. But this is as close to the Paris Climate Accords as we've seen in a long time from the U.S. From the U.S.'s perspective. Over the last few years, we've seen a lot of commitments on methane. We've seen commitments on deforestation, but we've never seen a firm commitment by the U.S. to continue to live up to those Paris climate agreements to make sure that we are net zero by 2050. So these highlighted and these key announcements coming about where we're trying to close the last coal-fired power plants as soon as possible is extraordinarily reassuring. And I'm really glad to have seen this come out of COP28. I think, though, we've seen a few different perspectives on this issue, especially with regard to our use of energy over time and what we intend to do with the technological ramping up in order to offset that coal with other green energy sources as well. Well, there's also some other pretty big news coming out of COP28 with a bunch of nations committing to the use of nuclear as a way to cut their capacity for production of fossil fuels. Close to, I think, 22 countries pledged to triple their nuclear capacity in order to push the cutting of fossil fuels, including one of them being the United States. France and Britain being the other two. The UK doesn't really have as many nuclear power plants, but they have a few. But France, of course, being one of the champions of nuclear energy, at least for the last 60 years. So the cooperation between the three of these countries in pushing for technological advancements is also extraordinarily reassuring. Among them also being South Korea and Sweden and Canada. However, it also comes...
And Finland.
And Finland,
yes. And Finland.
Shout out to Finland there. So yeah, it's a pretty crucial moment, I think, especially for the idea of advancing nuclear generation, nuclear power production. John, do you have anything to weigh in there with regard to our use of or tripling of our nuclear capacities?
Well, as you know, there's political issues associated with nuclear energy. There's a public perception that it's potentially unsafe, and represents a high risk, at least the traditional pressurized water reactor type nuclear power plants. And that's been unfortunate that the political atmosphere has, over the decades, sort of diminished the attention to the development of newer technologies that are much safer, much less prone to proliferation risk. And the public perception has sort of reduce the public support for funding of research and development into the new technologies. Finally, the United States is engaging in this. We have a prototype small modular reactor under development, a generation 4 type power plant reactor that is passively or potentially passively air cooled and using the pebble bed technology. So it's interesting developments. It's unfortunate the U.S. isn't leading, but we're sort of lagging behind maybe 4 or 5 other countries that have already initiated such projects on generation 4 nuclear research and development. But we have a lot of capacity in this country, so once we engage that, we'll probably climb the learning curve rather quickly. Now, in past years, both the China and the Russia pavilions have focused on nuclear energy. In recent years, China dropped out. They did not have a pavilion in the past, last year. They have one this year. But I do not see them having a nuclear focus yet. I'm going to take a closer look at their presentation agenda. And then I was at the Russia pavilion, and in their previous years, they had also focused very intensely on nuclear power. But with the war in Ukraine and the threats to the power plants in that nation, that has sort of undermined any potential leadership of the Russian Federation along the lines of nuclear energy, and it's probably done damage to the overall public perception of nuclear energy, seeing it not only as a power production facility, but a potential dirty bomb weapon if deliberately attacked by one nation or another, or even terrorist activity. So, nuclear energy has a lot of potential, but it has a lot of traditional risks as well as some newly introduced risks or perceptions.
Absolutely. Dana, do you have anything to weigh in on this topic?
Yeah, actually, unlike many of my colleagues that I work with, I happen to be very pro-nuclear, partly because of where I live and the developments and the new technologies which have been extremely successful there for both the deployment of nuclear energy and the storage of nuclear energy waste, which is done several miles underground. As many of you may know, Finland has now become a new member of NATO because of the war in Russia. And when the war broke out, we were cut off, and we applied for NATO membership. We were cut off from gas supplies from Russia. But because of our new nuclear energy deployment and our fast construction of wind turbines, we've been able to bridge that gap. And we are on our way to becoming carbon neutral, using nuclear energy as a bridge technology until other renewables can catch up. Finland is a very pro-nuclear country, and as are most of the Nordic countries. And I know that there are a lot of talks within one of the pavilions that will be taking place on the 6th and the 7th, addressing just this issue.
Absolutely.
In the long term, our current fission reactors are a bridge technology to fusion reactors. So fusion reactors are always saying it's 20 to 40 years away. Saying
right.
Current pressurized water reactors are a bridge nuclear technology to get us to the generation 4 fission technology, and then ultimately to fusion. There may be other forms of energy that begin to deliver in high volume, thermal.
Absolutely. John, try speaking a little bit closer to your mic if you can.
Yeah.
A little bit of action going on in the background with all the various logistics. But interestingly, today I visited the Russian pavilion. And as I mentioned, that pavilion in past years has focused almost entirely on nuclear energy and nuclear technology. But coincidentally, I encountered a person who I had last seen in, I guess it was 1992, and had first met in 1990 when I hosted him for a visit to the United States. And his name is Andrei Sharonov. And at that time in 1990, he had just become the Minister for Youth Affairs in the Soviet Union, and had been the officer of Komsomol, the young communist organization in the Soviet Union. So he was a very progressive politician, or up-and-coming politician back then, coming out of Nizhny Novgorod. And Nizhny Novgorod is the home of Andrei Sakharov, who was the inventor of the Soviet hydrogen bomb, and then became a dissident, a opponent to the communist government. And he had been placed under house arrest in the city of Nizhny Novgorod, and was in effect the hub of the pro-democracy movement in the Soviet Union. And he had a number of proteges, and most notably Boris Nemtsov, who went on to become a premier and then in recent years murdered. Andrei Sakharov was a noted dissident. And then Andrei Sharonov, also from Nizhny Novgorod, went into the Soviet government, then the Russian Federation government, and held a number of posts, including deputy mayor of Moscow, and then most recently the director of prominent business college, the most prominent business college in Russia. But now he is the head for Russia's climate initiative. So while Russia has one sector of its government focused on certain issues, he has moved himself over into the climate area. So it was interesting to meet him. He had been, we hosted him, as I said, in 1990, and then together we formed the organization called the American-Soviet Cooperative Exchange, which we then changed its name after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. We changed its name to Intelligentsia International. And that's the group through which I host all of the university students that work with us on various projects. So this was sort of a blast from the past, and whereas our directions had sort of diverged over the decades, they have now crossed paths again, focusing on climate. And I think that you're going to see that around the world. Some people like myself started in the climate direction back in the 80s and 90s, and then some others have simply come to it more recently. And as we get more people entering this climate solution space, hopefully we can bring enough resources to bear in our respective countries to properly address the issue, and hopefully maybe have our countries understand that we need to get away from these nation-to-nation conflicts, seeing each other as our competition and as our threats, and really recognize that humanity as a whole faces a superseding, overarching threat of climate, and we must put aside and remedy these other conflicts and make more resources and focus and cooperation available to bring to bear on the climate crisis.
Very true, John. It's a very apt speech given the two, or actually more than two, major conflicts happening around the globe right now. Multiple genocides, multiple issues between peoples that are really, really showcasing that it takes a lot for humans to actually cooperate and work together, especially when there's so much history, background, and cultural feelings that may get in the way. Our cultural, realities that get in the way of us actually being able to cooperate, and which really does showcase that this issue, this climate crisis issue, really does take precedence in our time as the need to really work together in the best way that we possibly can. Now,
Now,
but also to keep in mind that, oh, yeah, go ahead, John.
We're here representing the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida and Democrats abroad. But in actuality, our blue zone passes are in the name of Intelligentsia International. So, we bring whatever resources we have from various organizations and things that we're engaged in, and bring them together to focus on climate, whether it's from the political perspective, the international relations perspective, the science and technology, education perspectives. We all have to bring whatever our work, whatever our connections are, we need to focus those assets on this climate crisis.
And from the
Absolutely.
perspective of the U.S. government and the Democratic Party, which is why I'd like to give a nod to Vice President Harris and her announcement today of $3 billion going towards climate action outside the United States, which I think everybody is heralding as a long-awaited announcement and a very positive step forward in helping to mitigate climate change and bring real action to where it's needed.
Absolutely. It's a
Dana,
really good point, Dana.
Dana, could you maybe a little bit about the sessions you attended and some of the people you met?
I'm sorry, John. Yes, and in fact, today I was attending, I had the opportunity to meet Deputy John Kerry's Chief Deputy, Rick Duke, today, and I was able to take him aside and have a small chat with him. He was instrumental in helping to bring forward that announcement with John Kerry, and of course it was given by Kamala Harris. This has been in the making. This was really applauded by
Oh, Dan, I think we lost you there for a second.
Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you fine, John. I think we lost Dana, though.
Yeah, she was just commenting on the fact that she met John Kerry's deputy and will be getting in touch with him to see if she can schedule an interview. And we have a number of other activists with the Democratic Environmental Caucus who are working to develop the contact list and get in touch with the staff of the various U.S. representatives and senators and agency heads who will be attending this COP, and see if we can line up interviews with them as well. Last year we were able to interview Representative Castor, the head of the House Climate Committee, and hopefully we can get hold of some of the similar U.S. representatives this year.
Absolutely. I think that those interviews really did showcase to our audience the types of high-level people, but also the types of folks that actually have their boots on the ground. We heard from folks from the nuclear industry, folks from the food industry, quite a bit of folks that we entertained last time with our Intelligentsia and Campus Climate Corps daily briefings, who showcased what actual boots on the ground of the climate crisis really looks like. Which, speaking of, I am now going to pivot our segment over to our very own Michael Fidler, who's going to show us some photos and a little bit of commentary about what he has seen on the ground, and also showcase to you a little bit about what it looks like to be on the ground at COP28. So, Michael, I'm going to send it over to you.
Well, thank you, Rock, for the floor. I hope you can hear me fine.
Yep.
And I'm going to share my screen so I can show you a couple of the images I have taken today. And I have to admit that I had a very early start today because we are in Dubai, and I just couldn't resist and I couldn't help. I had to go see Burj Khalifa. It's my third time in Dubai, and every time I get here, I need to go and see Burj Khalifa. So I had a very early start because Burj Khalifa is simply the highest building in the world, and I wanted to see it again to see if they build it any taller. It's now 850 meters or so, and it's still there, and it's an amazing building. Now, yesterday, when I was reporting about some of the funding for the loss and damage fund that the United Arab Emirates donated $100 million to that fund, it didn't seem to me like the right amount of money which should have been put to this fund, because it's way too low. I checked what was the cost of building Burj Khalifa. It's $1.5 billion. So what they donated to this fund yesterday, it's really only 8% of the cost of this one building. And if you look at the skyline, how much money has been spent here, you put the numbers into perspective, and you know that the amount of money donated to that fund is way lower comparing to what it should have been. But I played the tourist for maybe an hour or two, and then I headed back to COP. This is the last image from the Burj Khalifa area, and then I headed to COP. And I want to show you a few images from the various pavilions I visited today. Now, during the previous COPs, we always get the chance to, the pavilions were very congested. They were right next to each other. Now, at this COP, it's different. They are in separate buildings, and there is always, or not always, very often, there are closed doors. And I don't know, can I get in? Should I not get in because there is something going on? There is some QR code on the door. Do I bump into some presentation? Will I bother the people there? So I don't think it's really managed that well at this COP. That's just an image of people opening the door and not knowing what's really behind the door. So it's always a surprise. Obviously, Japan, they worked it out. They put sandbags, they open the door, and there are 2 or 3 people just standing by the door, always informing you what's happening at that specific time in the pavilion. So Japan is usually very unique. Here is an image from the. There was also some high level talks today. So today it was G7 and China Leaders Summit. That was not possible to get in there. And this is an image of the typical COP boards with the programs. They are always rotating. So last 2 days, there was not really going, there was the opening ceremony and so on, but not really much, not many meetings. I think today it started to be really busy, and you can see on the board that there was just one meeting after another. This would be just an image from the area where there are computers. We spend quite a bit of time here because there is a good connection. You can work quite well. And I also had a look into the media area where the journalists are. And in my opinion, these are the most hardworking people at COP at this point, because you get there and they are completely focused. They are not fooling around. They just work all the time. Because if you work elsewhere, you can see the groups mostly of young people sitting around, drinking tea or drinking water, chatting. There are also some concerts and so on. But the journalists are the hardest working here, in my opinion. And I visited a couple of the pavilions. And since I used to work in Tajikistan, I spent there a couple of years. I always start my day in Tajikistan pavilion. When I walked in, it was basically empty and there was nothing happening at all. I talked to the people, 2 people who were there kind of stuffing the pavilion, and they told me that the Tajik president was there in the morning, and as soon as he left, they basically called a day, and they were having the afternoon off. I really wanted to see the Tajik president, because when I photographed him the last time, maybe 6-7 years ago, I got arrested. So I was wondering if this would happen again, but I just came too late, did not really know that he was in town. And when I asked the Tajiks what is the program for the rest of the day, I was able to get a program only from December 6th. Although they have programs today or tomorrow, day after tomorrow, they simply weren't able to give me a schedule of their programs. So it shows you that some of the pavilions are kind of on, I wouldn't say vacation, but they are not working very hard. Then I just walked across the street to the Bangladesh pavilion, and I was surprised that there was a presentation from Zambian Minister of Foreign Affairs or a member of parliament. I did not really understand why. And it's because if you look at this image, you can see in the top part that it's an open space. And right behind the wall, there is another pavilion. And there was a lot of noise coming from that other pavilion. And it was very difficult to really listen to that presentation. This is just another image from different pavilion. I think it's Germany. And again, you can see just behind the wall, there is a different pavilion and the noises are just coming into each other. And sometimes it's very difficult to listen to a presentation. And this is probably how it ends because there is so much noise. A lot of the people who want to talk to each other, they just go outside and talk to each other in front of the various pavilions. They just cannot stand in with all the noise. Also outside, it's really nice. I have to say it's really nice outside of the pavilions. Some of the pavilions are pretty small. It's really cramped, just few chairs. So I am not surprised that people like to spend the time outside and discuss stuff there. This is just one image from, I can't remember whether it's an innovation or it's a youth hub, and they have it actually organized the way we were used to see in the previous COPs, when there is the open space and there are the various booths right next to each other. I was looking here for the Atoms for Climate pavilion or the booth, and I walked around and I simply could not find it. And I walked around the second time, I still couldn't find it. And only then I realized the building actually has 3 floors. So they put this specific booth to the second floor, but there was nowhere a sign saying that you go to the second floor. And when I walked up to the 3rd floor, there was basically nobody. There were just staff booths, but people don't realize that they can go to the 2nd or even 3rd floor. So that's something COP should work on, because there was certainly a lot of work put into preparing these pavilions, and people don't really get a chance to get in easily. Now, this would be probably the last image of the day. It was a hard day. It was a lot of work, a lot of walking, and a lot of heat. So I look forward to taking a break like this gentleman right here. And with this being said, I'm turning it back to you.
I think there are some days where we all feel like that gentleman sitting there on the bench like that. I know I certainly do after an exam here at University of Florida. Anyway, there is a few more news segments that we should definitely get into before we close out our meeting today. One being the recent developments on methane. I believe that a couple of years ago, actually last year, we had committed to reducing methane emissions by 30% by 2030. And in this COP, we also saw a development come out where methane is attempting to, or there a lot of oil companies are attempting to plug all methane leaks by 2030, which brings about a really interesting debate, really interesting discussion, I think, which is, are the planned reductions in methane use, simply by these companies simply attempting to reach that 2030 goal by simply plugging the current leaks that currently exist. And a little bit of research shows that a large amount of methane is definitely emitted into the atmosphere simply through leaks in some of the systems that currently exist. So I think it's a really interesting tidbit there that a lot of companies are committing to reducing methane emissions by 30% by 2030, while at the same time attempting to use this way out as a means of doing so. If anybody has anything to comment, or if anyone has seen anything on the ground with regard to the methane announcements today, feel free to jump in here.
Yet, but this is certainly part of the initiative of the Inflation Reduction Act. And there is money being funneled into places like Texas to help plug some of these leaks. And it's also part of some of the agricultural initiatives with livestock and other forms of agriculture, which I'm sure John could tell you more about. This is going to be an important focus here at COP this year.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I'm going to go ahead and there you go, John.
Last year, we did an extended segment on methane and nitrous oxide from agricultural sources. And I think once we go through the ag pavilions and see what updated information they're providing, maybe we can go through some of those numbers again so people have a better idea of the scale and the magnitude of the agricultural contributions to the greenhouse gas problem.
Absolutely. I think we did multiple segments on agriculture methane use last year. It'd be nice to revisit those numbers, especially from a perspective of 2023, and see if the numbers have moved significantly or if they haven't. And this, yes. And I think this comes as we are reviewing 2023 as a full year and seeing how this year has really broken so many new climate records, as kind of every single year does. Every single year that we come to COP28, COP27, COP26, we're looking back on the year and seeing multiple records broken, multiple agreements that are simply not getting fulfilled, which really does, I guess, provide a lot of context for our discussions here today as Democrats. How are we able to unite our party and discuss how our party can contribute? Go ahead, Dana.
I do think we have made tremendous strides in increasing our renewable energy thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act and the concerted efforts of the Democratic administration. But it does seem that we are just adding new energy. It's a time of energy addition rather than energy transition, because our fossil fuel consumption does not seem to be going down. And this is what we absolutely must make some headway on, or we will fail.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of folks highlighted the Inflation Reduction Act as probably one of the seminal pieces of legislation of the Biden administration. And I do like to see Kamala Harris here at this event trying to tout the strides made. But also, Dana, you're right. We haven't significantly reduced or even plateaued our use of fossil fuels. In fact, our use of fossil fuels has grown since 2022 and 2021, which is a really major red flag. And this is especially true as we're seeing most Western nations reducing their use of coal, except for Germany, of course. I think we all know that Germany's decrease of nuclear is unfortunately been offset by their increased use of coal. But most Western nations are in fact reducing their use of fossil fuels, some even reaching net zero temporarily, like Portugal. A lot of developments came around in Portugal, I think a couple other Western nations that had net zero for a few days, or at least even a few weeks of 2023, showcasing that it is possible for Western nations to achieve net zero.
The fossil fuel industry is receiving $7 trillion yearly in subsidies, and they are spending $500 billion in creating new fossil fuel infrastructure. How can we start to reduce our fossil fuel usage when we are subsidizing and building new infrastructure?
Absolutely.
And that's not to mention some of the interesting news that we have learned about our host country here in terms of their production and their oil deals.
It's a crazy number, 7 trillion for fossil fuel subsidies, which perhaps should strike you as the fact that it is a full quarter of the U.S. GDP, or actually actually a third of U.S. GDP, since I think we're at like $23 trillion in GDP. Let that sink in. That subsidies for fossil fuels are a full third of what the U.S. has in gross domestic product. It's absolutely, it does boggle the mind. And this, as Michael Fiedler pointed out, the fact that we're tossing in $3 billion for the Global Development Fund, or the Global Development Fund for nations trying to wean off fossil fuels. And we're saying, okay, $3 billion here for developing nations, and then also let's give 7 billion to fossil fuels, really does showcase and put into perspective just how much of a global system we have relying on fossil fuels and promoting fossil fuels and the utilization of fossil fuels, as we're throwing pennies on the dollar to developing nations and saying, listen, this is all you're getting, this is all you're using to transition away or to not industrialize using fossil fuels. Good luck. That's just simply something that we can't take lying down. So it really does showcase that, Dana. It's crazy.
It's baffling. While I have the opportunity, I'd like to share with you and our audience that we at Democrats Abroad, there are Americans flying in from all over the world to attend this important climate conference. And we at Democrats Abroad, in conjunction with the country committee of the UAE of Democrats Abroad, will be holding a reception on the 4th at 7 p.m. And we thought it would just be an in-person reception where we will be welcoming several high-level guests and Americans that are coming in to join us, and people who live here in the UAE. But we've decided we're going to also live stream in from the reception and let you talk to a few of the Americans that are coming in, who are enjoying the conference, or who are here professionally, or who are just living here. So I hope that you look forward to that and that you will join us as well, Rob.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to, and definitely look forward to it.
The name of the event is Americans Convening on Climate.
Okay, I'm definitely going to save that. Thank you very much for that plug, Dana. And for any of our listeners, obviously it'll be live streamed. Is that correct, Dana?
We will have a corner and we will live stream during some of the event. And I'd like to remind everybody out there, I know you have a lot of students who are listening in with climate, with your campus climate corps. Many of you will go abroad, years abroad. If you're going abroad next year, you must remember to register to vote. And you can do that on our overseas platform called votefromabroad.org. It is so important. Every vote counts. Wherever you live, when you vote in the world, you can register on votefromabroad.org. Your ballot will get back and we will make sure that it is counted.
Absolutely.
If we want to climate crisis, we're gonna have to solve the democracy crisis, and we can't do that unless we make sure that Democrats win up and down the ballot in 2024.
Well, I mean, I couldn't have said it better, Dana. If you want to solve this climate crisis, the best thing you can do is to go and vote. It's really just as simple as that. Protesting is amazing. Getting out there and talking with your representatives, it's all wonderful and it's all well and good. But if you want to solve the climate crisis, the first thing on that to-do list needs to be whenever you can vote, you go vote. If you're abroad, it's Democrats Abroad. Just you gotta make sure you send in that ballot from wherever you are internationally to make sure that you get your vote registered. Okay, any last comments here? Any last announcements before we before we close out for today? Okay, I would like to say thank you so much for everybody joining us. This was day 3 of our daily briefing from the UAE inside Dubai. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending today. As always, please feel free, if you want to have any questions, comments, or concerns, reach out to us via email. Reach out to us. We're more than happy to address any of your questions, comments, concerns. And be sure to join us tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for our coverage, day 4. So glad, again, to have each and every one of you with us today, and we will see you tomorrow.